Thank you, Rachel. I'm glad you edited some of what I shared with you. That was very tactful. Well, it's amazing to be here, and today has just been a fabulous day. Thanks to the Morehead-Cain team for just making it so easy to be part of this day from the interview side. And thanks to all the scholars for just being such incredible interview candidates and the wonderful discussions that we had. It was really fabulous. Before I get going on my real bit of the talk, which I will keep brief, I want to admit to making a bit of a strategic error. I spent yesterday engrossed in reading the applications of the students that I was going to be interviewing today, and it was only after I'd done that that I realized, oh, I need to make some notes about what I'm going to say tomorrow. But at that point, I was completely intimidated because every single one of you completely outshone me in everything that you've accomplished in your first year of college. I would have been so left behind. So I stand up here in awe of all of you and just want to say really a very, very genuine congratulations to each one of you. Every single one of you clearly belongs in this room. You have earned it, and it's an enormous privilege to be here with you. I'm also confident that you are going to go on and have just the most incredible impact at your time at Carolina and well beyond. So I'm excited to hopefully see some of that happening. Where am I? Chris asked me to speak earlier in the week, and he said, don't worry, you don't need to say very much. The stars of the show are the questions that will be asked afterwards. So I am banking on you guys to make me look good. So start thinking about those questions, and I'll be ready to answer them, and yeah, you'll help me live up to everything that Rachel said. My Carolina story is a little bit different, in part because I kind of came here on a bit of a whim. I am English, as you know from Rachel, and at that time in England, university was pretty much free, and so there was really no reason to think about going elsewhere. So I had never considered the chance that I might look to go to college anywhere outside the UK. Ended up being nominated and then offered a Morehead-Cain scholarship. I had never heard of the University of North Carolina. I knew a little bit about the Morehead-Cain scholarship because some others from my school had gone. But the more I dug in through the interview process, and I learned that this was amazing because this was a liberal arts institution, very different from what I would have had to deal with in the UK, where you specialize at 16 and you get funneled into one particular subject. And I had somehow inadvertently found myself studying maths, physics, and chemistry, which I didn't really like, and found out I wasn't actually that good at it. And so coming to America freed me from all of that. It gave me an escape hatch. So the liberal arts piece was just an enormous attraction. And then we started learning about this mysterious things called internships. I'd never heard of an internship, but the Morehead-Cain was going to provide this incredible series of opportunities and over the course of the 4 years, and that was just marvelous. There was also the issue of the weather, which I have to say was the icing on the cake. I did not do well in England in November, December, January, actually February and March too, when it's dark most of the day and drizzling. And the idea that were going to be Carolina blue skies in December was really pretty exciting. Definitely did cross my mind that might be a reason to come. So when I went home and announced to my parents that I had been given this amazing opportunity to study in the United States, and by the way, I've actually accepted this offer. They were less than convinced. They also had never heard of the University of North Carolina. But my father put on a brave face, and he got out the family atlas. There was no internet at the time, so we got out the big Family Times atlas. And then we couldn't find Chapel Hill on the map. And at that point, they asked me if I really had thought about this enough and did I really know what I was doing. Fortunately, I stuck to my guns. And that decision put me on a totally different trajectory, opening up ideas and experiences and opportunities that I would never have been exposed to if I had taken the standard path of staying in the UK. So I am so deeply grateful for that big trajectory change that the Morehead-Cain offered me. As Rachel mentioned, I grew up living outside the UK, primarily in Africa and Asia. And my childhood experiences of seeing at a very young age kids that looked like me, but they were hungry, they were ill-clothed, they were begging on street corners. Meanwhile, I was being driven around by my mother in a car going to the supermarket. And as a sort of a 7, 8, 12-year-old, none of that made sense to me. It was deeply upsetting and unsettling, and in a very simplistic way, it had an enormous impact on who I am today. And it ingrained in me a sense that I had an absolute obligation to do something at some point in my life to make life a little bit better for the kids that I had seen through that car window in the kinds of countries that I had lived in. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But whenever I wrote an application, whenever I talked to somebody, that's what I said I was going to do with my life. Well, it wasn't quite that simple. I came here, and like most students, I sort of did a whole bunch of type A things, and I decided I would major in political science and econ, escaping from physics as quickly as I could, which was going to give me a good grounding for trying to have a career in international development. I played on the women's lacrosse club and ran that for a number of years, which was fun, made a lot of great friends playing women's lacrosse. I volunteered at the Campus Y for a bunch of things and got involved in various executive committees. And I took classes in lots of random subjects that people said had amazing professors, and Chinese poetry and Russian literature and US military history and things I never imagined I was going to take classes in. I also delved really deep into the poli-sci and developed an incredible relationship with one particular professor that I resonated with and became a mentor going forward. So I sort of, I did okay on playing those first couple of years out at UNC. I also had a lot of fun at the same time. A lot of bike rides through the rolling hills with my then boyfriend, now husband, many years later husband. But also, I admit, quite a lot of time on a Friday and Saturday night at He's Not Here. The drinking age was different back then. But with people who became my lifelong friends, and many of whom I actually worked with at different times throughout my career. But as I look back, there was really one pivotal moment from my Carolina Morehead-Cain experience that changed everything. And that's what I want to share with you today, is that one moment, because it's somewhat random. Back then, it was many, many decades ago, I won't say exactly how many, the Morehead-Cain program expected you in the summer between your sophomore and junior year working in private enterprise for companies like Goldman Sachs and Shell Oil that they had generously lined up for us. Well, I didn't really fancy that idea very much. The idea of corporate America, no, I was planning to tackle poverty. Why did I need to know about the money side of things? So somehow I was able to convince the Morehead-Cain staff, I'm not sure it would fly now, things were a bit loosey-goosey back then, but they convinced me and a fellow scholar to go to South Africa to work for one of the anti-apartheid organizations over there. And I won that by arguing that learning firsthand about the struggle to bring down the apartheid regime would be much more relevant to what I wanted to do working in international development. We had a pretty mundane job. We worked in the organization's library, but it was sobering, and the work that we were doing was going through newspapers and identifying and logging all of the people who had died on that day, mostly from black-on-black violence that was systematically inflicted by state-sponsored intimidation, right, against anybody who was trying to dismantle the system of apartheid. But we also got to travel a fair amount across the country and witness firsthand the horrors, the suffering, and the incredible inequity that the brutal apartheid system had created. We could also, though, feel this growing sense of optimism. There was some real progress being made in that struggle, and it was exciting to be there. I got a real, felt energized by that. And thankfully, the Morehead-Cain had absolutely no idea, but a state of emergency was declared while we were there, and it all got quite hairy, but there was no cell phones, there was no internet. They had no clue how to reach us. We were utterly unreachable. So we got to stay there and witness all of that. So I loved it all. It was very exciting, and it confirmed my love for the continent, but also my desire to drive change. And I came back very fired up and energized by everything that I had seen, even though it was appalling, right? At the end of the summer, right before we left, I asked our host, what can we do when we go back to the US? What can we as students, is there anything we can do to help? And his response was a little different than you might expect now, but it was, help Black South Africans have access to the kind of educational experiences that you're getting. That is what is going to be the future of our country. So we came back and thought, okay, what are we going to do now? How do we do that? So we went to the Campus Y, which seemed like a great place to start, and created something that we call the South African Scholarship Fund. committee at the Campus Y, and we estimated that we needed to raise about $60,000. We'd never raised a dime in our life, had no idea how we were going to do it. Again, no internet, so we went to the library and we got out these big directories of companies, and we looked up all the companies that UNC invested in, and it was part of their endowment. And we sent letters to the CEOs of those companies. And remarkably, they responded. It was kind of crazy. We sold Krispy Kreme donuts. We got cool T-shirts made, sold those to students. And we managed to somehow get ourselves on local television news shows and talk about what we were doing. And we ended up even presenting our case to the UNC Board of Trustees, who agreed, amazingly, to match all the funds that we raised. So much to our surprise, by the end of my senior year, we had raised enough of an endowment to fully support 2 South African students to go through university every year. This was very small in the big scheme of things, and in and of itself is not particularly important, but it changed me forever, and that was why I focused on it. It instilled in me a confidence that if I set my mind to something, I could have real impact on global problems, which is what I had in this deep feeling that I needed to do in the world. It also planted the seeds of an entrepreneurial spirit that I actually didn't know I really had. I don't think I knew what entrepreneurship was, but that feeling of building something stuck with me and came to be really important later on. So I graduated, and I did all kinds of different things, from working on Wall Street — yes, I realize that was ironic since I refused to do private enterprise — to working on refugee issues on the Afghan-Pakistan border after the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Along the way, I ended up at business school. Yep, again, never mind. And worked in boring things like, well, so I shouldn't say boring, inspiring things like management consulting, and a couple of tech startups early on in the internet, in the development of the internet. I got married, I had some children, we lived in indigenous villages in Ecuador so my husband could do his research. And all through these weird collection of sort of disconnected experiences, I learned a ton. I worked with amazing people, and did reasonably well. I seemed to be able to do all of these things, but there was always something missing. I never felt like that I was doing what I was put on this earth to do. There was a hole, and I was desperate to seek it. I was getting older and older. I'm still getting older, sadly. But there was definitely a feeling like I am not hitting the mark yet here. There's something missing from my life. Well, that all changed in about 2010. And I was sitting in my office at the University of Iowa Business School, which was where I worked, talk about random, when the stars sort of aligned and everything fell into place. A gentleman who was connected to the business school walked into my office and said, I've heard that you're interested in Africa, and we know you're a strategy person. I need your help. I have an amazing friend who's a doctor. He's in his 90s here at the University of Iowa, and he's developed a new treatment for the way clubfoot is treated. Well, I had no idea what clubfoot is. He showed me a little movie which explained that clubfoot is a very common birth defect. 1 in every 800 children around the world is born with this condition. It's routinely treated at birth in countries like the US and the UK, which is why most of us aren't aware of it. But in low-income countries, where 90% of children are born, these kids are growing up with no treatment at all. And if you're born with clubfoot, your feet are twisted inwards and upwards, and it's very painful and very difficult to walk. And if you can't walk in a country like Zimbabwe or Nepal, life is really very, very tough. No school, no opportunities, a lot of neglect, higher rates of physical and sexual abuse, lifelong poverty. It's not a pretty picture. And yet this man was telling me that this doctor at the University of Iowa had spent the last 40 years developing a non-surgical treatment that could be delivered in low-resource settings for very little money, and all these kids could walk and be put back on a different trajectory for the rest of their lives. I burst into tears. I had a very visceral reaction, and I went home that night and said to my husband, I know what I need to do with my life. I need to solve the problem of global untreated clubfoot. Gave me a bit of a quizzical look and said, oh, great. Okay, well, I'm here with you. What can I do? That led to, I'll cut the story a little short, but a couple of years later, I found others who shared my belief that this was an extraordinary way to have impact, and there was a real opportunity to fix a very big problem. Untreated clubfoot, it was the largest single cause of physical disability in the world. So I started an organization called MiracleFeet, and I sat down again with a blank sheet of paper like, oh, how am I going to do this? But all of those experiences and the confidence that I had gained from the Morehead summer and the entrepreneurship and even the fundraising skills that I'd gained here came to bear on that moment. And we built the organization. I ran it for 13 years, and we were able to expand to 37 different countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. We have now treated over 120,000 children around the world, which is way bigger than we ever imagined, raising about $60 million to support that work, so the treatment is given for free. Along the way, oops, I forgot my little prop here. I did some pretty cool things that I think are really cool, which was worked with the Stanford Design School to design a brand new brace to replace the one that is commonly used, which costs between $350 and $1,000. This costs $22. It's now in use all around the world. It feels so cool to know that that's out there. Got a grant from Google to build incredible data systems so that all of our work is data-driven and that we can see the quality and those kinds of things. So the work was exhausting. It required me to travel a lot, be away from my kids who were still quite young, but I fortunately have an amazing husband who jumped in. But it was so rewarding, and it gave me enormous joy. And a lot of people kept saying, "Oh, you're so good for sacrificing so much." Are you kidding? This is so fulfilling and so exciting to me. I just felt incredibly lucky that everything had come together, and I was able to do this kind of work. So that's my story. And I really believe that the seeds for MiracleFeet were sown when I decided to go to Carolina, but also to ask to go to South Africa instead of going to New York, and then to come back and try to respond to that request for help. Those all came together and really laid the groundwork. So what are my words of wisdom for those of you who have 3 years left at Carolina? They're probably things you've heard from many other people, but I'm going to share them anyway. Push yourself to go deeper and broader, always, which means digging into those places where you feel a spark and you feel a passion, where you feel that I need to help children feeling. But also branch out, because it may not be that thing, right? Who knew that clubfoot was going to be what I was going to end up working on? I didn't know. But if you're not open to the new ideas, you're not going to find the thing that may speak to you or that opportunity. Question the status quo. Keep questioning the status quo. Do it respectfully and thoughtfully. And where you see gaps or where you see inadequacies, forge your own path and try it, right? Don't hold back. Go for it and try to solve the problems that you see out there. And that may mean going against people that you respect or that you have seen as people of authority, like me, ignoring the fact that my father didn't think that this was a great place for me to be. He has finally changed his mind on that. And lean towards action. Right? We can all sit around analyzing things forever, but you're going to make more of a difference if you step up and try to solve the problem and actually put your ideas into action sooner rather than later. And my big lesson was that I did that in a couple of instances where I was not qualified to be the person solving that problem. I was definitely not the best person to solve the issue of clubfoot. I have no medical background whatsoever. But I was the only person who was stepping up to do it. And so we solved it. So don't worry too much about, am I the best person? Am I qualified? If you find a place where you can make a difference, go for it. Find other people that can fill in the gaps in your knowledge. Bring them along, and it will be incredibly rewarding. And last but not least, while you're here, you're very serious people and very accomplished people, but make sure that you have a lot of fun as well. Make sure that you meet those friends and spend time later when you are of drinking age, and he's not here, having the odd beer from those big blue cups. That will also be time very well spent. So I'm going to end, and you're going to ask amazing questions. Please. Yes. Oh, I've met tons of them. And I've stepped away from it now. I'm still on the board, but we hired a new CEO, and so I'm not doing that now. But I calculated when I stepped down that I had visited over 120 clinics around the world, different clinics. And it was my favorite thing to do, and I would spend a lot of time working on fundraising and sort of tackling the nuts and bolts of the organization, which sometimes made me feel really far from the reason I was doing this, which was to impact the kids. So I would jump on a plane whenever I got that feeling and go to a clinic and work while I was there. But my favorite thing to do was to see the kids running around and to but especially to meet the mothers, because the mothers were the ones who could really communicate to me what this meant. They knew when they saw those feet on their child that their child had a really grim future ahead, and they were terrified. They were frightened for their child. They were frightened for their marriage. They were often blamed for the problem. And so then hearing their story about that fear evaporating when they managed to get their child to the clinic and be told by, we did this all with local doctors in government hospitals. So they would, be told by the doctor or the nurse that their kid was going to be fine, and their kid was going to walk, and their kid was going to be able to kick a soccer ball, which is really important in many countries around the world for boys and girls. That comes up all the time, and go to school and get a job. That was just such enormous relief. So I loved talking to the moms. The kids were usually too busy to talk to me. They were running around like crazy things all over the place. And we start the treatment when they're really, really young. So, a lot of them are like, 3, 4, 5, pretty rambunctious and chaotic. But yeah, it was fun. My favorite part, actually. Oh my goodness. Okay. You next to Chris. Well, I'm not running it, but my plan as a board member, and I've communicated this very clearly to the new CEO, sometimes we wish I didn't communicate so clearly, we're trying to end untreated clubfoot on a global scale. So with the number of children that we're enrolling right now, we need to grow by a factor of 4, which to me seems quite doable. We can do that. If we can raise $200 million over about the next 12 years, we can make sure that every child born with clubfoot in a low and middle income country where there isn't treatment will be treated. So it's kind of fun to have a problem that you can really check off and solve. Whether we do it or not will depend on whether we can raise the money. But that's the long-term goal. Yeah.
Hi, Anaya. I'm Anaya. So going from the UK to Chapel Hill to a bunch of different countries with MiracleFeet, how would you say Morehead-Cain has helped foster your ability to become comfortable being uncomfortable?
Ooh, well, we were just talking about how uncomfortable it was when I showed up here, and how unexpectedly different Carolina was from everything that I had experienced before, and particularly to what my idea of university was. It was just physically different, the education system was different, and it was full of people who were mostly from a state I'd never been to. So that was very uncomfortable. And I think the Morehead-Cain, what the magic that they bring, and particularly now, I mean, this program has evolved greatly. So when you compare sort of the Morehead-Cain now to what it was when I was here, quite different, same basic ideas, but so many more opportunities. But it's the opportunities that are offered out for you to accept that I think make the difference. And many of those are opportunities to intentionally feel uncomfortable, to put yourself in difficult, and hopefully not unsafe, but difficult situations, and learn how to manage the people, the situation, and your own safety to come through that ahead of where you were when you went in. So there's just, every internship, the classes you take, but also just coming to Carolina for many of us, I'm sure, and I know there's others in this room who came from far away or from very different backgrounds or experiences, and it's a shock to the system. So that in itself was super uncomfortable. But pretty much every day I was doing MiracleFeet, it was uncomfortable. I was terrified. How am I going to raise the money? Am I going to be able to meet payroll? Are we treating the kids well enough? It is not for the faint of hearted to create something and build it on that, especially when it affects people's physical health. So I would say highly uncomfortable pretty much every day. Oh my goodness. Here, we'll start with you. I would call up someone like you and say, let's think about this. So I don't know a lot about homelessness. I'm aware of it, and I read the papers and see it. But it's not an issue that I've delved deep into. But my advice, if it's something that you're interested in trying to figure out how to tackle, is to focus in on a small piece of it, to find one part, to make it manageable, right? To break it down into, because unless you can really measure your progress and get traction against it, it's demoralizing, but it's also kind of like, how do you know if you're actually making a difference? So I think finding one piece of the homelessness puzzle, which, as you say, is immensely complicated and different for many different kinds of people and in different places, but sort of trying to find a place where you see an opportunity to carve a part out, right? And I think that's true for solving any of these big problems. It's like it can be completely overwhelming if you say, I'm going to solve climate change. Well, no, I think you'd never come out from under your sheets in the morning if you thought you really had to solve all of climate change. But if you can do one or two things to put us on a path to addressing climate change, then it's fine. So, pick battery technology or, whatever it is, wind, I don't know. And I think that would be true of homelessness too, given the complexity. Yeah. Okay, you're right in my view, so.
I'm Ryan. First of all, thank you for your time and your talk. I've been thinking something about your talk a lot, and I've seen this a lot where very driven people find themselves in careers that they don't really enjoy, and they don't really feel that much meaning in. So do you have any words on how to navigate that if you find yourself in that situation?
Well, I think I feel bad that I made it sound like I didn't enjoy some of the things I did. It was sort of a love-hate relationship often. So there were parts of it that I absolutely loved, and there were parts where I was like, this is driving me crazy. But I think the most important thing is that you're learning and that you care about what you're doing at some level. So I think if you find yourself in a bad situation and you look around and you're like, if you don't like the people you're working with and you're not learning, you need to get out of there. And I know that can be very hard. It's not, you may need the paycheck. There may be lots of things that would stop that, but you need to start figuring out how can I get myself out of this situation? So I would say it's fine to go to take a job that you think, this isn't my dream job, but I'm going to learn a lot and it's going to set me up for the next thing. And I like some of the other people that are here, and I believe in at least most of what I'm being asked to do, and it's not unethical and those kinds of things. I mean, I think you have to, if that's not true, you have to extract yourself and get out. I have a term for it, but I'm not allowed to say it here. But you have to have a certain attitude that you will walk away from any job you're in if it crosses boundaries that are not okay for you. And I think that when you have that feeling that you're in charge and not whoever you're working for or the company that you're working with, it's a bad situation. So make sure that you maintain control of your decisions and your choices so that you don't find yourself in that position. Okay, well, yes, here, sorry. Either one of you.
Hi, my name is Sophie. And moving a bit more generally, I wanted to ask, is there a piece of advice that someone else has given you that's been especially impactful for you?
Well, there's so many things I don't do well that I get a lot of advice. One of them is be more patient. I'm very impatient. I'm always trying to go on. And then the one that I really need to work on, and I think is so important for so many of us, is just listen more and say less. And I try to do that, but I'm still not good at it. And I'm just turned 60, so I'm not sure how much hope there is, but I'm going to keep trying. Oh, yes, at the back. Yes, Kate.
Yeah, if I can draw kind of an ambitious arc maybe from the South African Scholarship Foundation to your work with MiracleFeet, I'm curious on how your philosophy on fundraising has changed, and kind of whether the sources of funding in your work inform your philosophy in approaching the work.
Yeah, I've done a lot of fundraising now, and I have no philosophy around it, except that I'm extraordinarily grateful to anyone who's willing to write a check. I mean, I truly, truly just have enormous respect and would want everybody to know that they're a true partner in whatever I'm trying to do. And I think that's why we were very successful with MiracleFeet raising money, was because we treated our big donors as real partners and we were extremely transparent. But in terms of a philosophy around it, what I did learn is you just never know where the money is going to come from. And so the more I fundraised, the more I felt like it was sort of like, you would throw different ideas at the wall and see what stuck. And I was really bad at predicting where the money was going to come from. But it always came if you did the right activities, right? So you have to be sending out the right proposals, and you have to be meeting with the right people, and you have to be marketing yourself well, and you have to be on social media, and you have to, do all of those things. But the year that you think all your money is going to come from USAID, no longer, you get it from some high net worth individual. And the day you walk into a meeting with someone who's extremely wealthy and has a child born with clubfoot, and you think, this is a slam dunk, how could they not give us money? And they say, sorry, this just isn't my priority right now. I'm giving a lot to this and this and this. So I really have learned to just be very authentic, to be completely honest, never make anybody feel guilty. I don't think I've ever walked in and asked for a dollar amount. I just say, this is what we're doing. If this speaks to you, we would love you to help us. And amazing things have happened. So I have no formal training in fundraising. I never thought I would like it. But I think you follow your instincts and you make it very human, and that seems to have worked. I think what it did was give me a lot of confidence that I could stand alongside the kinds of people that end up rising to the top of places like Goldman, and go one-on-one with them. That I didn't need to feel intimidated by them. I didn't need to feel inferior to them. I could speak their language, which helped, so learning just that sort of business communication I found useful. But it was really about confidence. And so I had 2 years at Goldman Sachs. I got there. I knew nothing. I don't know why they hired me. But I somehow ended up being sort of the top analyst in my 2 years. And I thought I was terrible. I went through 2 years of thinking I was the worst analyst out of the bunch of, 50 of us, whatever. Because it was just such a tough environment, and nobody ever said anything nice to you, really. And so, I kind of got through my 2 years. Fortunately, I found this amazing woman partner mentor who, to this day, I'm in touch with and I adored. So she really kind of taught me a lot and made it a positive learning experience. But I got to my final exit interview, and they said, well, we really hope you're going to come back. It was a 2-year program, right? So we really hope you're going to come back. And I was like, what? I'm not even ever going to business school. You're not going to want me back. And they said, no, you are the highest, you've received the highest bonus of anybody ever. I'm sure the next year somebody else did, so that honor didn't last very long. But knowing that, as I did walk out the door and never go back to interview with them again, I just felt like, okay, I could have done this if I had wanted to, but I don't. I have no interest in this. I don't want your life. I don't want to be in that seat at that table. It's just not who I am. Fine if that's what others want to do. That's totally fine, but it's not me. But it gave me confidence. It gave me kind of some attitude that, okay, I tried it, and if I wanted to stay, I could have, but I've decided that's not for me, and that's okay. So I don't know if that really answers your question. And I really had a true love-hate relationship with that 2 years, because you work so hard. I barely slept, but I would do it again, because I truly think that some of the pieces that I learned there allowed me to create MiracleFeet. So it was painful, but I'm glad I did it. It's not for everyone, though. Yes?
Thank you so much for sharing your journey, first of all. As part of MiracleFeet, which aims to solve such a large problem on a global scale, you worked in a lot of different team settings and even been involved in managing teams. So what would you say were the biggest challenges working in those team settings, and how did you deal with this?
So it changed as the organization evolved. When we first started, the hardest thing was to find anybody who would come and help us, right? We were tiny. Nobody knew if we were going to be successful. We had no track record. We didn't really know what we were doing or what we were talking about, and we were trying to hire amazing people to fill in all of those gaps. So that was challenging, and we had no money, so we could only pay people a pittance, and no benefits, right? We were all buying our own health insurance and everything else, as one does. As we got larger, we needed to and fully committed to hiring mostly people who were in the countries that we were working in. And that, because they were closest to the problem, they knew everybody, they knew had relationships with the government. It made complete sense, right? And didn't have to put people on airplanes. But that became challenging, just trying to create a team when people are on different time zones and, you know, all over the world and speaking different languages in some cases. The advent, we started this before Zoom was a thing, right? So when we first started, Chris probably remembers it, we were using Skype for Business. Oh, and you'd get like 2 or 3 people on, and then one would fall off, and then the next one would fall off, and then the next person would come on, but then you couldn't hear them. And I mean, it was so painful and so difficult. So that was a real challenge for a while, just trying to create a cohesive team and communicate with them and make them feel part of something. That's really changed a lot now, and it's very seamless, as you all know. So those would be some of the challenges. I think the nonprofit sector is always a little tricky because you have to find people who are passionate about the work and are willing to take you know, a financial cut in order to do that work, although we do try and pay people properly and market value and all the rest of it. So I guess I would flip the question a little bit and say, having said all of that, the people, for me, was the hardest part of management. And the places that I struggled and found the most challenging was just all of the people management. And the bigger the team got, you know, the more people there were to manage and the harder that became. And sometimes I would say, oh, my life would be so easy if I didn't have all these people, which obviously is nonsensical. I don't know if that answers the question. It's a good question, though, very important. Well, do cut me off when we're, last question. Okay, I think you put your hand up first. Yes, right there. Hi.
Kirsten, I really loved how your nonprofit is looking at like a global issue, but like we need to address them on a very local scale. And so I was wondering, like, this is sort of a two-parter, so sort of violating the one-question rule. But how did you, like, going into these local areas and working with like local doctors, like you mentioned, how did you start building those relationships and like gain the trust? And then also, were there any places that y'all went to that there was like pushback maybe like on your invention,
Right.
on your type of like
Right. It's a very good question and really important, and was probably one of the hardest things that we had to kind of figure out in the early days when we were developing the model. So when we first started, we fortunately had really good relationships with the University of Iowa, where this method had been pioneered, and doctors from the University of Iowa had been going mostly to Latin America because both of them spoke, the 2 key doctors, one was from Spain. Oh, both of them were from Spain, so they spoke Spanish. So they had gone to some countries in Latin America and trained some local doctors, and they gave us names of people that they said were phenomenal doctors and were really committed to this methodology, were working in public hospitals, and we went and found them. I mean, I would just get on the plane and go down and meet them and say, okay, we are trying to help, you're already doing some of this, what do you need and how can we help you? So we did it initially through sort of referrals of people that we could trust. Then we got to the point where we had to start training people from scratch and going to places where no one had ever done this method before, but which would have been absolutely impossible in the early days because people would be like, who the heck are you and what are you coming to tell us what to do, right? That doesn't work. But we became very quickly, it's a very small community, the clubfoot doctor community, and so people started reaching out to us and saying, you know, I've been trained in this, I'm desperately trying to make this treatment available across Zimbabwe or wherever, and I'm really struggling, and can you help us? And so we tended to go to places where people were reaching out to us and inviting us to help, as opposed to just showing up and saying, we're here to help you, which is not the right way to do things. As our reputation grew and, you know, we became known within this little tiny clubfoot community, we had the opposite problem, which was sort of trying to decide who we could work with and who we had to turn down or put on a waiting list and say, we got to wait till we have more money and we have the capacity to do it. So I think that was the first part of the question. And then, yeah, no, I'll stop there. And then, because it was the last question. And then the second part was, did we go to some places where we couldn't find anyone, or we weren't wanted, I think. So we didn't really go to places if we weren't wanted, but there were, in a lot of the places we went, there were some doctors that were all in on this non-surgical treatment, and there were others, mostly much older orthopedic surgeons who were like, nobody, especially these young upstart doctors from my own country, are going to tell me, the senior person, that we shouldn't be doing surgery anymore. And so we had to deal with that resistance, which was really tough on the local doctors, and we were there sort of to help enable that shift in that process. So we didn't have outright rejection, but we did have resistance to changing the medical technology that was being used. So, okay, Chris was right. Amazing questions, and hopefully you've forgotten everything I said, and you can think about all the wonderful questions that came from all of you. Thank you, Chris.